Drive.
Okay.
There's, and it's gone. Okay.
He's recording the call. Ruh-roh, Raggy.
It needs to let both of us know. Okay. Y'all ready for this?
Yo, ready for this? That's not the right one.
Bum, 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 bum. Yeah. It reminds me of Space Jam. I watched that a ton as a kid. So
I watched Space Jam like once.
I don't have like a particular. It's nostalgia. I know it's a bad movie, and like I wouldn't sit down and watch it today for nostalgia's sake because it's not very good. I know lots of people are like say that it's amazing, and I'm just like, no,
You
but
know
it's
what?
not.
I think I watched it within the last year just to sort of
Oh wow.
like double back,
hmm
like and
Michael
say like,
Jordan is atrocious.
yeah. But it's just like, I mean, like the thing is like that whole movie is just really like that movie is 20 freaking years old
Yeah.
and change. And
hmm
it's like that's like it's indicative of like what we were watching in theaters anyways.
Okay.
Like in a lot of ways. I'm like,
hmm
yes, it was like and I have this very distinct memory because like Pulp Fiction came out the year prior or whatever
Wow.
and like in high school and everybody was like it was like the thing that like everybody was like this is made like we were seeing like Tarantino
hmm
and then it's like you got Space Jam and it's kind of like it's like but it was like it was a world in which like both of those things were sort of like they coexisted
hmm
without too much
Yeah.
like craziness or animosity.
And
So
both were very popular. Yeah, that's so weird.
yeah, it's like they sort of existed within the same ecosphere. It's it's weird.
That is strange. All right.
So
Sorry. And after that little tangent, here's the real music.
so hey Josh, I know this is a little weird, but
Mhm.
you know what's scarier than Bloodborne and the deep dive into Bloodborne lore that you just sort of like dropped on my mine head,
Mhm.
my puny eyeballless brain. Do you know what's scarier than that?
What's scarier than that?
Is that Pulp Fiction and Space Jam existed within the same time frame, and both of those are beloved pieces of cinema. And I'm
Cinematic
using that
history.
term broadly because we were just sort of talking, pre-show about like how atrocious Space Jam is. That movie is terrifying.
Mhm. Mhm.
That is nightmare fuel, but of a different sort. It's
Mhm.
not nearly as otherworldly. Um, it's just horrific. So
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't even take like a dream or a nightmare in order for both of those things to coexist at the same time. It's the same dimension in which they were released and both made very popular. That is an interesting concept there.
it's horrifying.
My whole life
But
is a
you know what?
lie.
You know what isn't horrifying?
What's not horrifying?
Our podcast, the Backlog
That's true.
Breakdown.
Yeah,
I'm Nate, and you're Josh,
it's
and this
true.
is our podcast. But
Hey,
I'm sure that the people who are listening this far, who have made it this far, like all 2-3 minutes into it, are like, they're smart enough to figure that out. I hope.
hopefully, yeah. You
Yeah,
you know what
I have
else
faith in
is
them.
horrifying though? I do. I agree. The rest of this episode because we're talking about horror games.
Oh,
So,
well, yeah. That's the topic of the show is it's another how should we then play?
mhm.
And this a little bit of a genre study. We opened up these sort of one-offs or these spin-offs, or I don't know, whatever we want to call it, but the How Should We Then Play series with a personal favorite of ours, JRPGs, and and we're getting it because it's October, and it's
Spoopy.
it's
It's the
spoopy.
spoopiest month of the year.
It's the spoopiest time of the year. People are going to be spooping themselves left and right.
Yep. That happens.
I don't know why I go for that one every time. I think it's just
you spoop your brain in order to make eyes, and you see all the things that you couldn't see before.
I just go for like it's like low hanging fruit, and I'm just like, no, I'm gonna go for that gag every time. It's
true.
I'm awful, and I'd apologize, except I don't really feel bad. It entertains me and it makes me laugh.
Well, just so that you know where I stand, I think you're horrible.
Oh,
that was bad. That was bad. Swing and a miss. All right, so moving on.
You know why that was a miss? Because puns are the worst. Yes. Thank you, John Ralphio.
I mean, I'm a dad, so I have to give the dad jokes. It's just what happens. You pop out a kid and boom, all your jokes are terrible.
It's just bad jokes. Like if you actually are funny in real life prior to fatherhood, I just flip the switch. Dunzo.
Sorry. You're reading off cue cards now, okay? Suckers.
So how you been, man?
It's been good. It's another 2 weeks have happened since the last time we recorded a podcast.
It's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, that is true. It's a thing that happened. 14 entire days. A whole fortnight's gone by. It's strange the way that time goes by. No, I mean, lots of not too much video game playing. We'll get to that in the report, but I don't know, a bunch of school. My class is almost done, the current one that I'm taking, and then my new one starts. But towards the end of that, so fun tests and all that good stuff, and so yeah, just been busy with lots of other things with life. Yeah, I can't think of anything huge that's happened. I've been studying Bloodborne lore.
You
really.
did. Well, I mean, dude, like you were able to sort of like put together a like coherent enough, like a cogent sort of half hour, 45 minutes that actually sort of distilled like the sort of the pivotal moments in that world, even though it was just, and again, we sort of were talking about this before the episode proper, and it's just like, it's just such a weird and esoteric sort of like world and bit of lore, and then for them to sort of like hide it under all of like the weird, just like that game could have used like a few more narrative, like expositional dumps to maybe frame out the world a little bit. But either which way, I mean, the game's still like tons of fun.
Yeah, it is.
I wasn't nearly as concerned with the story as I was just like mechanically. It is just a bit of an incredible experience, but it's just, even after we were talking about it, like, and you and I, prior to this recording this, we were both sort of like, hey, you know what? I kind of want to go back and play it.
I want to play it. Yeah, I totally do. Yeah, after looking into all that stuff. And it's funny, I didn't mention this, so I'll mention it here on this episode. But part of the reason that I even did that was because I mentioned that I was kind of looking into the lore after doing the episode last time, 2 weeks ago. And I kind of mentioned in passing, maybe I'll do a bite size on the lore. Haha, wouldn't that be funny? And one of our patrons, Paul, was mentioned in the Discord. He was like, you should totally do a lore episode. So I was like, well, I was planning on talking about Transistor, but I am actually way more interested in Bloodborne lore. Not that Transistor's not a bad game, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I'm just not sure that I have too much to say on it that hasn't been said already. So when he said that, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that for a bite size. So I need to look into that a little more. And every single freaking time I went to look into it, it left me with so many more questions. Like I got some answers, some vague answers, but then they led into these other topics, and hence the 45-minute presentation. I feel like it should have come with a PowerPoint on on who these characters were and all that
Welcome to your
stuff.
TED
So
Talk.
yes, exactly, exactly.
This
Yeah.
is that was it's Josh's TED Talk. I think when you do sort of like the editing for that, you should change the opening to that. Be like, and or the closing. Thank you for listening to my TED
My
Talk.
TikTok. That's a
Just
great
you should
idea.
just tack that right in there. It'll
I love
be
it.
fun. Be fun.
How's your Fortnite been?
Pretty good. Yeah, so it's been basically 2 full weeks on the well, and change on the sort of going back to just carrying one route. And I as like just as far as like mental health goes, that was such a necessary move in so many
Mm,
ways. Like I think like I have just that's not to say that I don't get frustrated with like general stupidity and things like that, but there was and we've talked about this a little bit, but there was just so much like uncertainty with my schedule
mm,
what on the float because like I would go into work and I was just like I was supposed to be carrying this route and I ended up like not doing that at all, and it was like that just I think there were it just it had been that way for like months,
yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe even the better part of a year or two. And I just was like, that wears on you after a while. And I just was so like sort of exhausted and for lack of a better word, like brittle. I was just kind of like I was just like constantly sort of like on edge, like just ready to like pop, like very tense, terse.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it's like it's been much better. But yeah, I mean things are pretty good. Um, we spent some time with my sister, well, with most a good chunk of my family the other day, and that was nice. It was cool, like getting to be Uncle Nate, like farting on small children, and uh, it's like the like all the cool parts about being an uncle. Like
Hmm.
it's just like but give me 1 second here. I'm gonna go stir my fire up just so one
Do
more
it.
time.
Stoke it. Stoke the fire. What was that? What was that Metallica lyric? Give me something. Give me fire. Give me something. I don't know. I don't know. I feel dumb. Oh, I don't have anything for you. It's weird.
Yeah, and if you don't edit that out, the listeners will hear me going around and poking at the I had a fire today. We were in the 40s for most of the day, and I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, you know what? I fireplace, and
Nice.
so, but
Nice.
yeah, it has been nice. Uh, a fire in the fireplace is a good thing, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a good thing. But yeah, things are pretty good. We're sort of, uh, yeah, we're just sort of we're maintaining. There's some
Mm-hmm.
stuff that we're in the midst of sort of figuring out some stuff. Like this is actually tends to be sort of a tight kind of time of the year
Okay.
because Megan only gets paid with the job that she has as a sort of tutor. It's not even like she basically in a lot of ways is sort of acting as a special ed teacher for some kids in the cyber school stuff.
Okay.
And but the way that job works is she only gets paid once a month, and so
Oh.
but it's like instead of like how like your paycheck is always like 2 weeks behind,
Mm-hmm.
like so it's like her paycheck's like always a month behind. And
Ah.
it's kind of like it's one of those things where so this is the month that because her one client has extended school year hours, but this is like
Gotcha.
the time of the year where like this is the month that we don't have a check from her as far as that goes. So we're sort of like it's a little tight. It's not like bad or anything like, but it is like have to be a little more mindful. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but yeah, uh, I had earlier when we were sort of talking about games, I
Mm-hmm.
had like this really like clever segue to like, usher us into the backlog report.
Mm-hmm.
But that moment passed a little bit ago. So
Ah,
instead of having a clever segue, how about unless you have anything else, let's just jump into the ye old backlog report.
ye old backlog report. 2 weeks old. Let me check this out.
I have no idea. Like
All
I just.
right. It is what it is. Welcome
Mhm.
back to the backlog report. This week on the backlog
Sorry.
report, we have games, we have books, we have lecturers. I don't know. Let's see what I have. What I said is I haven't really played very many video games this past 2 weeks, which is kind of weird. It's just trying to get other things done, and well, for other reasons, I haven't had much time on the handheld either. So I played a little bit more of the Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D on my 3DS. I played through another world or two, so I'm towards the end of that. I think I'm on the second to last world already. It's taken me way too long in terms of just like, hey, this is the game that I've been playing. I just haven't played it in a while, but it's
Yeah.
fun. I dig it. Um, but I usually play that one on the elliptical, and it's changed. I haven't been on the elliptical as much because another game that I've been playing is a little game called Ring Fit Adventure. Um,
Oh,
see,
fancy. You fancy.
I originally picked it up back when there were like the shortages, and like COVID had caused it to sell out. And so I was like, hey, I could get some money for this. And I bought it. And that's like at the start of the restocks. So I've held on to it for a month or two. And the price has not gone up because like it's in stock everywhere. So of course, like supply and demand. It's very simple. Um, because it's like I don't want to spend $80 on this thing, but I did. So what am I gonna
Yeah.
do? So I busted it out. I started playing it, and it reminds me the trap that I fall into of doing the same thing over and over again when I exercise. Because this one has you doing different things, and I feel super out of shape playing this game because I'm like,
Yeah.
I've been, it has like a workout time. So I'm like, I've been playing for, 35, 40 minutes, but the workout timer is only like 16 minutes. I only have like 16 active minutes in the game, and I'm just like, oh, I'm old.
It
Jeez.
hurts.
Yeah,
Everything hurts.
exactly. Like I haven't used that in a while. Oh, crap. Game, why are you
I
calling me out on that?
I
So,
would like to pick that up at some point in time because I feel like that would be a fun little like sort of like it would be like fun to sort of like fire that up in the morning for like a half hour and like just sort of get the blood flowing.
yep.
I mean, the other thing is I could just get up and do like 20 minutes of, you know, cardio and,
Right.
body weight sort of exercises, but I don't. So it's kind of like, I'm probably like if I get to the point where I'm just like getting up and actually doing that stuff, well then maybe I can entertain the Ring Fit Adventure idea.
That was part of it is like this will help get me because I've gotten into a bad habit of either hitting snooze or if not hitting snooze, just coming downstairs and then falling asleep on the couch. So I was like, at least this way it gamifies that because
Mhm.
I like to work out first thing when I wake up. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah, I feel
it
you.
it's been fun. I will the problem that I have had is that you do a lot of like running in place, and so I hurt my ankle doing that a few days ago. So I haven't been able to play it because I don't want to push it and like hurt it worse.
Yeah,
So it's probably my fault. I should have like at least put on shoes instead of just running in place on my feet. But Anyways, I do enjoy. Yeah, it makes me feel super out of shape, and I'm like, I'm not that like I've still been exercising. It's just I've been working on my arms and being on the elliptical, and that's pretty much it. And this is like, no, do other things, and so I'm like, ouch, that hurts. So, lesson learned. I'm lazy. And then finally, the other game that I've started playing. Well, September's over, and so it's BioShocktober. So I've been playing BioShock. A little bit of BioShock whenever I've had the time. It's another game that I can't really play during the day because it's got some spoopy images that I don't want my children seeing when I shoot people in the face. Probably not a good idea. But I'm really digging it. I just got to what is the name of the place? Now I feel stupid. I should totally know. But there is it's not Alphadia or whatever, but the place with all the greenery, all the shrubbery. I just got through that place and it sent me somewhere else. And so I don't remember. Arcadia was the name of the place with all the greenery. But then they shoot like sorry, minor spoilers. It's not really a big deal, but if you haven't gotten there, sorry. The green place eventually turns brown because they start killing, or they start shooting spray to kill the greenery. And I just beat that, and yeah, I can't remember the name of the next place. So I think I'm like a third of the way into the game, maybe a quarter of the way into the game. So I need to play more of it because I don't have much time to beat it. It's BioShocktober. Join us. Let us know where you are. Let's play it together.
From the time we are recording, you and I have 2 weeks to beat it. Which isn't terrible. 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think how long to beat has it listed for like a 12 to 20 hours, depending on the part of the show where I look things up on my phone.
We need to have like a little jingle for that. The part of the show where I look on my phone. Something.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should mention that. Part of there's the Super Best Friend video game sleepover.
Mm-hmm.
They have a little jingle. The part of the show where they Google things.
That's funny.
Yeah, it is. It is. The one guy always sings it when they Google stuff.
That's really similar too. I've never listened to that podcast before. So
that's sort of like, well, you should. It's a good one. So 12 hours for just main story. Completion is 22 hours. Main plus extras 15 and a half hours. So
that's crazy because I feel like I've already put in at least like 6 or 7 hours. So I don't know.
You might have.
I guess I'm just slow. That's probably a big part of it.
Well, I think too, like the thing is, it is a quicker game. Like 20 hours, I think is not is reasonable. So
yeah, man. That's all that I've been playing over the past 2 weeks. I have been listening to a few more books. I finished up that the memoir with the autobiography by Thomas Sowell, and then just jumped right into one of his other books. It's called A Conflict of Visions, and that one was really interesting. It basically talked about how so from a Christian perspective, this is the way that I'm taking it. He's not espousing Christianity in the book, but how basically we all have presuppositions, and depending specifically the way that he talks about it, the way that we view the nature of man. This is how I understood it. Also has a major part into the way we view government and how we ought to treat man and how we ought to not rule over, but govern man.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you see man being left alone as degenerating, then you would have another vision of what government ought to do, like the function of government and what it does. But if you see man as a being that left to his own devices, he will do best, for society. Then that highly affects the way you ought to govern. So that was an interesting listen. After going through that book, I have been listening. I've been on a big Jordan Peterson kick.
Hmm.
So I've listened to a lot of his podcast episodes. I talked to you, said that I cleaned out my garage this past weekend and mowed the lawns, did a bunch of like yard work and stuff. And I was basically listening to Jordan Peterson all day on 2 times speed, which is not necessarily recommended because he already kind of talks somewhat fast, or he jumps from concepts very fast. He's a little rambly at times.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's really I just really dig it. I'm stoked that Paul Maxwell is going to start putting out content again, and so
Hmm.
that it was from one thing like an article which I highly recommend. I know we don't usually do recommendations, but he wrote an article on on the church and masculinity, and it was really good. And so that just plunged me down the rabbit hole. Not that necessarily Jordan Peterson talks about that, but um, I don't know.
Well,
They're connected in my mind
they're sort of
somewhat.
they sort of exist within the same spheres in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. Um, I think Jordan or Paul Maxwell. I mean, and he when he was first started the self wire stuff,
Hmm.
it was very much like he sort of wanted to be sort of the reform slash evangelical voice, um, speaking into the sort of the intellectual dark web stuff.
Right. Right.
And I actually saw a tweet from him today where
Mm.
he he is going to be coming back. Like I think he does plan on sort of like, his thesis, his doctoral thesis or whatever was
Right.
published
Hmm.
on trauma and reform tradition, and so there's that. But I think he's going to be taking a little bit of time off.
Right.
Um, to he's going to be spending a few months just basically doing some self self-care, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. And so
Mhm.
but then he there was also a tweet a while ago where it sounds like he's going to be launching his own website and stuff. And um at some point in time I'll look at that, and it'll probably be one of those things where I do like a monthly sub for a few months at a clip, because the deal
Okay.
was like the lifetime membership locked you in at a rate.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, like that's cool, and I wouldn't mind having access to his materials like that, but at the same time, it's like I've got a bunch of other stuff on my plate that I need to sort of chew through first.
Yeah.
and and I am interested in his content, but uh not so interested. I mean, it's not to say that it wouldn't be worth it, but I feel like the $150 or whatever it was a year, I was just like, I
Yeah.
don't
That's
have
pretty
that.
big.
I
Yeah.
don't have that right now.
Substantial.
Yeah, it was a substantial sort of like I said, Megan and I are sort of in that we're in a tight space sort of
Right.
this month anyways. So it's like kind of like, well, I was like, you know what? Like it can be something where it's like maybe I'll sign up for a month and see, or like do like a quarter. Like I'll sign up for a little bit, see how it goes, and gauge it from there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Dude, that's super cool. That's awesome.
but
Yeah, that's what I've been into lately. What do you have to report on?
um, well, you and I were talking before we started recording the episode proper. As far as games go, it's been a whole lot of Hades, and by a whole lot, I mean roughly 55 hours.
Whole lot of
The
Hades.
My Switch told the truth on me, and I did not appreciate it. I was like, like we were talking about it. I was like, I don't know how many. I've sucked a few hours, and I looked down. I was like, yeah. Kind of had a mild stroke. But the other thing is like that's all I've been playing. I was taking it to work, and I was actually playing it on my lunch break. Like I play it in the tub. Like
Nice.
I'm 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 obsessed with that game.
Dude.
I actually just cleared it for the first time earlier today. Like did like the whole, because basically there's four biomes really. Like but the fourth one is just sort of like it's a very abbreviated experience, like in
Okay.
a lot of ways. So you sort of battle your way through Tartarus, the fields of Asphodel, and then the Elysian fields, and then you're up in the temple. You have to clear that out, and but that goes pretty quick, and then it culminates. Yeah. Anyways, but it's yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's a very interesting story, interesting take on sort of Greek mythology, and yeah, I I love what Supergiant does. Like they're and this is probably like this is peak Supergiant in my opinion. So
Nice. Would you say it's the best game that they've ever put out?
it's hard to say that because
Mhm.
I mean Bastion Bastion, Transistor, Empire, like out of those three, like I would probably it's like Pyre is at the bottom of the pile for me,
Mhm.
just because
Yeah.
like I think just as far as like actual gameplay goes, it was fine. Like the game and the story was really fun and what they were doing was fun. Like but at the same time, I was like, it just kind of like it fell a little like flat for me.
Yeah.
Um and it's hard like I think right now I like it more than I like Bastion or Transistor,
Mhm.
but both of those games are so good. Like it's just like Supergiant is just like they're very much a top shelf developer, and I think you just need to
Yep.
like it's just like yeah, they're very good, and it's kind of like you know uh, yeah I just I don't know maybe I'm playing the mess out of it, but I also played the mess out of Bastion, and I played the mess out of Transistor, and I just kind of like yeah. Um,
Nice.
so there's that. As far as like reading or anything, I finished that Area X trilogy or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
it's weird. It's real weird. It's like really interesting science fiction, and it it's like it's very sort of surreal. Like it's just like and there's stuff it's very interesting. If you like science fiction and you like sort of real mind bendy science fiction, the Area X trilogy is probably like it's up there. It's good, but it's gonna like mess with your head a good bit.
Hmm.
Um, so there was that. Uh, I listened to a little bit more of Range, that Epstein book.
Okay.
Um, I fired up some of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux's on Loving Well again. Just start listening to some of that essay again. Uh, I was for a while too. I was listening to the Reform Forum did a series on the Pilgrim's Progress, and I was sort of chewing through some of those. And but yeah, as far as like actual reading or substantial content, that's pretty much been it. I've just there's been a lot of stuff where there well you know what there was a really interesting podcast and again sort of we don't typically give recommendations period. We just sort of
Mhm.
like say hey this is what we're into. We sort of like if you're interested go check it out. But something that um the Daily Stoic and I forget what his name is the guy who does that uh
Holiday.
Ryan Holiday, he had the developer of the bullet journal system
Hmm.
come in, and it was on the weekend edition of the Daily Stoic.
Okay.
and he did like, it's like a half hour, 45 minutes or whatever. They might have even talked for longer than that. But that was a really interesting um, talk. And
Okay.
sort of like a very interesting exchange of ideas because with so the Daily Stoic tends to be like these 3 or 4 minute like little like Stoic meditations that they sort of dump, and the weekend edition are like much more substantial
Gotcha.
like chunks. And he usually has like a guest on, and they sort of like he sort of does a little bit of an interview and sort of interacts with them. Anyways, he had the guy's name is Ryder something. I can't remember, but the guy who developed the bullet journaling technique, and it sort of got me back into like wanting to start journaling again because um, this is it's a good practice, it's a healthy practice, and it's actually sort of got me to the point where I'm probably going to be deleting a lot of like the productivity apps off my phone because I
Okay.
haven't been using them anyways.
Hmm.
But I think too, in a lot of ways, like it's like what I found is that I tend to be much more for me I'm much more effective when that sort of that tracking happens in an analog way. So if I'm writing things
Yeah.
down and I'm just sort of like working through the process versus if I'm just like ticking off boxes on my phone, I think that sort of does something to me mentally that isn't very helpful. Um, that and then you're constantly on your phone and junk, and it's just kind of like okay, like
Yeah.
it's you and it's like Megan and I were having a conversation because I actually, a while ago, I put Facebook and Twitter back on my phone, and it's like I've noticed that even since then, like my phone usage has sort of ticked up. But
Hmm.
yeah, I'm just gonna. I know this is like really super good radio. I actually ended up saving the episode because I was so sort of like impressed with it.
Hmm.
Uh,
Nice.
what is going on here? Uh, my phone is all the stuff that I didn't. It is 293. The Daily Stoic episode 293. It's Ryder Carroll, The Power of Journaling. I really recommend to listen, just because there is like I think there's a lot of like really uh, good information in there, like a lot of good thoughts on just sort of like what journaling is and what it isn't. And even just sort of like, the bullet journaling system has sort of like taken the world like in a lot of ways by storm. Um, there are like, there are a ton of people who are into this thing,
Hmm.
right? And it is a system, and it's a system that I might try using it again, and because yeah, I might try to pick it up and stick with it for like a month or two. And but a lot of what he says is like he's like, listen, do it the way that you like. There is no like one way to do this thing. He's like, this is a system that I developed based on tools that had been given to me, and this is what I find to be helpful. He's like, but he's like, it's not. This doesn't have to be formulaic. Like it
Hmm.
was very refreshing hearing somebody who created a system so like that even say like, hey, like like do what works for you. And I was like, that's very cool. Um, it's very refreshing because it
Yeah.
wasn't this like my 12 easy steps will help you fix all your problems.
Right.
It's like it was this dude that's saying
Buy
like
my
this is just
course. Yeah.
yeah, he was like, this system works for me. If it doesn't work for you, cool. Like, and I was like, that's super cool. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, you know, just I don't think there's been much of no. One of the things too is just sort of looking at that. I think I do want to get back into a rotation of like I had sort of fallen off the wagon, but I want to get back into my Old Testament and New Testament reading again. um, and just like taking a passage from time to time and just or not time to time but like daily taking a passage, writing it down, meditating on that and praying through that, and sort of like even just sort of asking questions like, was this show me about God, was this tell me about myself, what do I need, like, and in the light of this passage, what do I need to change? What do I need to pray through? Like what is, somewhere where my heart needs to change? Like what is, and I guess like sort of like it's like three questions basically, again, like what does this reveal to me about God? What does this tell me about myself? And then like what here needs to be prayed through or acted on. So,
Mhm.
but
Nice.
anyways, so that's I'm trying to sort of like get back in that, but you know, uh didn't do so great. Like I said, 55 hours on Hades will derail the best laid plans.
There you go. 55 hours in Hades.
55
So,
hours in Hades. Woof. Oh, that's yeah,
the
that's
name of a book by Nate McKeever.
yeah,
55
and
hours in
it's
Hades.
I've only cleared it like 3 times now. Like it's okay, so going back to Hades real quick. Like one of the things that's really cool about that game is, like I said, it's like these shorter runs, like a half hour, maybe 45 minutes or whatever. But in addition to that, like it does this really good thing, especially like when you turn the God mode on that I was telling you about
Mhm.
pre-recording. But it does this thing, like you almost always feel like you're making progress, like you're getting a little bit better at the game, like you're finding like these clever combinations of different, boons to like, and it's a very like Supergiant does a really great job of like there are certain elements of game design that they have that thing like it is a tight little like machine of fun.
Nice.
So
Nice. Dude, it sounds good. It sounds good. I'm tempted to throw another game on the pile, but we'll see.
yeah, dude. Like I mean like I definitely like keep an eye out for it and see
Mhm.
like if it goes on sale or whatever then but
Yeah. I don't know. This past weekend, like I said, I was cleaning out my garage, and so I looked at I updated my Excel sheet of all the games that I own. And let me tell you, to be smacked in the face with that list again was pretty horrifying. But more on that after our commercial break. Did you like that segue? Was that any? I was, yeah, just trying to use the word horror
and now a word
in
from our
context.
sponsors.
What? No, I'm just kidding. Um, okay, we can come back.
I just got a friend request from Black Sheep 0019 on Discord. Who are you, Black Sheep 0019?
Who you be, homie G?
Who do you be? Their avatar or their icon is like this weird mutual servers. Well, they're on. Mm, he's on TRG, I guess. Okay.
Oh, nice. There you go.
Uh,
You got a point of
okay.
contact.
Like he's on the TRG server. Or he turns out to be a psycho. I can always unfriend him. I
There you
ain't
go.
scared. I ain't scared. Ain't
So,
scared.
brochachos, you can ask us how that turned out.
Yeah, it's like
For
a
everyone
little
else,
point of.
you'll never hear this.
Oh, you know what I didn't mention,
Hmm.
but I was going to is that I, th- I think what I'm going to do, and I may have mentioned it to you, but I didn't. I meant to talk about it in the backlog report, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to stream my entire playthrough of BioShock over the
Nice.
next couple of weeks. So I might have to put Hades down for a couple of weeks, which I'm
Hmm.
not like, I'll be honest, is probably not a bad thing for me, but I'm not thrilled about. It's
Yeah.
like, so, I'm going to try and sort of play that um, and stream that for a couple hours at a time over the next few weeks. Uh, try to get, well, if let's just say like an average stream would be about 2 hours, so that would be 10. Hmm. I don't know if I could. I'm just like I'm estimating 20 hours just because I
Hmm.
know the way that I play.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, maybe we'll see. It'll probably be like at most like every other day or whatever, and it'll probably be about 2.5, 3 hours every time, and then maybe on the weekends I'll do. Well, and I have next Monday and Tuesday off, so maybe I'll do like
Hey.
some beefier sessions then. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, by the time this comes out, it'll
It'll already be going on. Yeah, that's
it'll
true.
already be
Oh
going
man.
on. But I mean, the
Brochachos.
patrons, yeah, they'll know.
Yeah.
So, but
Sweet.
anyways,
Okay.
so let's talk about there's a question that we like to ask ourselves every once in
hmm
a while, Josh.
hmm
And that question is, how should we then play? Which is a bit of an homage to Francis Schaeffer's book, How Should We Then Live? But because we're awful Christians and we sort of, I don't know, the word isn't steal, but we just sort of like take things and we just like we baptize them, but we don't need to baptize us anyways.
I mean, unless you believe in multiple, that if the first one didn't take, then then
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I'm a Paedo Baptist, and we sprinkle our babies and we
Yeah.
don't worry about it anymore. So
There you go. There you go. Uh, yeah, but so how should we then play instead of because playing's better than living anyway. So we're basically better than Schaefer. So it's like,
is it?
yep,
Is it?
yep.
I mean, just
Of-
and we're really bad at like staying like not dipping into tangents. But
yes, that's
I put that I did sort of throw that question in the Discord, and Paul was the only person who responded, and he was basically like, I don't read blogs anyways, because I was like, hey, what would you guys think if I started like writing down some of my thoughts and putting them on end? And Paul was like, and this is not meant as a guilt trip by anybody listening to any of the brochachas or anything, but it was just like I was just trying to sort of like gauge interest in seeing like who would be interested in reading some of my thoughts on Sabbath and vocation and recreation and the theology sort of all behind that. And Paul very adroitly pointed out, he's like, dude, you just kind of actually have a podcast where you do that. So I was like, yeah, but it's like a more formal sort of like compilation, of those thoughts and materials. Anyways, uh, so yeah, all
I
that
I
being said.
I did reply. I sent a meme. So
Oh, that's right.
my meme reply. There
You
was
did.
something there. I like
You
memes.
did.
Although memes sometimes they're good in context, other times they're horrible.
Oh, wah, wah,
Sorry,
wah.
like I said earlier, I'm a dad, so I make dad jokes. Today we are talking about all of the horrible things because we're talking about horror games and how should we then play a horror game. So, starting out this conversation about horror and gaming and all that, I thought it would be fitting to kind of take a deep dive into what makes a horror game a horror game. Like, what are some of the hallmarks of horror? What are some of the things that
It's
makes
spoopy.
this? That's true. Spoopiness, definitely. Does the game make you spoop your pants? Well, I guess it's a horror game.
It's I think there are two interesting distinctions that we need to sort of talk about.
hmm
Is that within sort of horror games, there's actually sort of a subgenre, which is actually a far more prevalent and successful like model or game type, which
hmm
is the survival horror genre.
hmm
Um, but I think the sort of without trying to sort of be too highbrow or too sort of like looking down my nose, but basically the short version is a horror game is anything that puts you in any game, and it can sort of fall within any genre, because I would even sort of say like the Parasite Eve games,
hmm
which are actually sort of an RPG, like maybe even an action RPG, and even Bloodborne, which is a hardcore action RPG. Like
Mhm.
they fall within the sort of horror camp.
Yeah.
Um, because it is like these basically the same themes that uh, horror stories and horror movies have like sort of tried to encompass. So whether
Yeah.
it's supernatural or psychological horror or whatever, um, and I think a lot of time like the most successful examples of this do tend to sort of be a little more supernatural in orientation,
Mhm.
versus like maybe the psychological horror. Um, but
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah, that's a good point because that means that when we talk about horror games, they're different in terms of like a genre of video games than what we talked about earlier, JRPG, or in our first How Should We Then Play? We talked about JRPGs. That has to do more with kind of the genre. It has to do with the way that you play the game, right? That determines whether or not it's a JRPG. With horror games, that's not necessarily the case. They're all different kinds of horror games. So I think traditional horror games are more like, puzzle games, if that makes sense, or games with
with a
puzzle
healthy.
adventures.
Well, with like health, like okay, so you and I were talking about it prior to recording this
Mhm,
episode, but Amnesia is
mhm,
sort of it's a great example of like a horror game, a sort of just, and it's a first person exploration sort of puzzle game
mhm,
with this sort of element of the like basically this thing is this monster or these monsters are just chasing you in this spooky place, and so
mhm.
it's very much about setting, it's very much about sort of like getting away,
Mhm.
um from
Yeah.
the big bad. And mechanically, that's actually kind of a really boring loop.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that some horror games actually even work because as I thought about this, one of the things that sticks out in my mind when you talk about horror games, just in general, I think the way that a game can scare you, the way that it can bring in these horror elements into more of into the gameplay, I guess, is to make you feel vulnerable, right? And to
Yes.
right in order to make you fear what's coming, you have to feel uh like you're not in control or like because most games are a power fantasy in one form or fashion. Like you have certain abilities and you need to use those abilities in order to progress throughout the game. Whereas one of the hallmarks of horror is that it's pretty much the opposite, right? You have to feel like you have your power taken away from you, like you're backed into a corner.
Yeah.
You have to feel that oppression, and so it's funny because even thinking about horror, the way that it works in terms of a video game, it actually goes against most the way that most games are designed. It's actually kind of the opposite. It goes in the opposite direction. And so there is a lot of possibility. You have a high probability, honestly, in my mind, of failure making a horror game. And that's when you end up with, forgive me, the game that we played last year. Was it last year? Yeah, Silent Hill
Silent
2,
Hill 2.
where the mechanics of the game I did not enjoy. Even though I do actually hold that game in high regard, I did enjoy the story the game was telling and the way that it told it, but the mechanics of the game, no, no. Like it needs some drastic updates in order to be
Well,
playable.
I do have to wonder, and maybe we wondered about this last year when we sort of played through it, but how much of that is just sort of like, sort of it is like that it's sort of its age showing a
Hmm.
lot of the controls and the mechanics, and it
Hmm.
would be really interesting to see somebody get their hands on that property and sort of reboot that game in a way like
Yeah.
what well and the thing though too is like so much of that, like when we were talking about Silent Hill 2, is like the environment really did feel like the environment and the sort of the oppression
Hmm.
and just like the vibe of just sort of like that sort of low key threat all the time that
Yes.
environment sort of was able to manifest. that was like really in a lot of ways the star of the game. Like
Yeah.
the actual game, like the mechanical segments of it were sort of like meh, like they were fine, but they weren't.
Oh man, I would straight up say some of the puzzles were bad.
Oh yeah,
Like
well,
I had to follow a guide for some of it, but you're right, it
I'm not
wasn't
even looking at the puzzles
uncontrollable.
though. Like just like the general mechanics of the
Yeah,
game were pretty like low
yeah,
tier, and I wonder how much of that was like again sort of like it's just showing its age, and how
yeah.
much of it was just overall design in a lot of ways. But
That's
yeah,
true. That's true.
that's a. I mean, it's one of those games. You and I both sort of ended up saying like it's a really interesting story, but I absolutely hated playing it. Sort of
Yes.
like it's like
Right.
yeah.
And it's funny just because how I think those two things fight against each other is like the design of making you feel powerless while at the same time not going too far to where it's like frustrating or just frankly boring. There's certainly that too. So some of the other things that I was thinking about as I'm thinking about horror, just as a genre, and I think this has to do with movies as well as video games, but some of the things that video games have learned from movies is this idea of kind of what I would say is like the uncanny valley, where there are things that happen that just aren't supposed to happen. There's certain visual elements, there's certain sounds that you hear that are out of place. There's a character that shows up that something about their body is wrong. Something about the way that they look is wrong. I think often I can find a lot of like the spooky atmosphere is because what I was expecting is in some way twisted and wrong. And I I I hate that I'm going to bring this game up a lot, a dozen times over the course of this episode. But I just talked about it for 45 minutes on the last bite size. But I think you see this a lot in Bloodborne, where you take these things. Like, okay, so for instance, the crows in Bloodborne. Okay, they're really annoying because they're on the ground and they like walk around and then they jump up into the air and like bark at you. And they have these deep kind of growls that like that should not be coming from a crow. This doesn't make sense at all. And so it's even more jarring because that sound should not be coming from a crow. This doesn't make sense. And so that kind of uneasiness, I think, and I think to that same point, I think sound is very influential. Just in horror games in general, they often have you kind of keyed into noises and sounds and things that really shouldn't be to kind of catch you off guard in order to provide kind of this horror atmosphere, this oppressive atmosphere. And I think that ties into finally insanity as well. So something seems off. Often, horror games will show you things or do things to make it seem like there's some element of insanity to different degrees. So there's games that take that all the way and go, like Eternal Darkness. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's called Sanity's Requiem, right? So you have these elements of, and I haven't ever played the game, but I've watched videos on it, where you have these elements of you don't know what's real and what's not real. So just the fact of some character, or even the character you're playing as going insane can often be used to great effect in horror as well.
Well, I'm glad that you actually brought up Eternal Darkness because I think part of what like one so there are a couple like trademarks. It's like or like maybe just sort of like common themes. Like setting is always super critical.
Yeah.
And it's like if the like we played Resident Evil 2
Hmm.
sort of towards the
Yep.
beginning of the year here. It was a super creepy game. A lot of it had to do with just the setting. and then the way that the zombies are leveraged, within that setting actually sort of turns up the tension and misdirects and everything else. Um,
Yep.
Eternal Darkness, is sort of one of the things that it does that it really sort of stands out to me is that instead of just sort of the game, like the setting is there, it's sort of creepy, it's a weird sort of spooky vibe, but then in addition to just sort of like the setting of like being in just sort of like an uncomfortable sort of space, they turn around and they actually totally mess with the player's expectations.
Right.
There's a lot of like, breaking the fourth wall and like messing with the player's literal head. Like one of my favorite, there was that sanity meter in that game. And when it started to get too high, you would get like these weird effects. And sometimes it would just be like you'd walk into the same room twice, and it would just like sort of but one of the ones that just really sort of like was just unnerving was it it the game simulated like basically like, and I don't know, but a blue screen of death, which there isn't like a current analog to that, but like old PCs when they would hit like basically a terminal error within a game or a program would kick out to this blue screen of death, which was just this error screen, and it was just like basically the only thing, and it was just such like a brain bending sort of experience, like
Yeah.
you're playing this game and then all of a sudden the game does that and you're just like, what the crap just happened? And like I think that's Eternal Darkness in a lot of ways is a bit of a standout because I think like
Okay.
those moments were absolute masterstrokes because it wasn't just like, okay, like the character in the game is sort of experiencing these things and those are unsettling to me because that's my proxy. It's like the game sort of sidesteps that and says like, and actually starts directly taking shots at the player.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
It's
and
breaking the
that's,
fourth wall.
yeah, and that breaking that fourth wall in that way is just, like I've only ever seen it done there, and I'm not saying that other games haven't done it. I'm just saying that in that particular instance, like that's remarkable. Like because like that is sort of like even it's like because it's one thing to sort of like play like Resident Evil 2 or Dead Space or whatever and sort of like your character, your avatar in that world is sort of in compromised position, is in sort of whatever. And even there, and a lot of times like through the progression of those games, like we talk about the idea of the power fantasy, gaming as power fantasy, but then how one of the sort of the theme like horror is really about sort of like removing a lot of that security there. But throughout the course of like games like Resident Evil 2 and Dead Space, there is that sort of you get more gear, you get better gear, you get, and which does a lot to sort of like stem the tide.
Yeah.
Whereas if you like and so there's a bit of an interesting like thought there for me where I'm like it would be interesting if, and I think Resident Evil 2 did a fairly good job of that, just like even at the end where it just felt like um I was like, especially towards the end of the game, like when you're doing like the underground research facility and all that, and it's like I always felt like I just never had quite enough ammo or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. You still have to unload, especially on like the last few bosses. Yeah.
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 So there, I mean, but I mean, those are some of the thoughts I had, just like in as far as like the ways that the game subverts the
Mm.
player's expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you mentioned it at the top of when we started talking about this, but how like survival horror uses this element of scarcity in order to make you feel uneasy. And I agree. Like, and yeah, the difficulty there is that because it's so effective early on in the game. It's like, how do you keep that up? Because okay, so you talked about Resident Evil 2 and Dead Space. I say the flip side of that is something like Resident Evil 4, where you feel that in the first few hours of the game, and then it almost by the end of the game you're playing an action game. I mean, there's
Yeah.
there's almost no. Uh, you might still have a sense of scarcity, and you can only carry so much, and you have a bunch of different guns. So, which ammo are you actually going to take? But at the same time, you're also taking down lots more enemies. It just, yeah, it feels much more geared towards action. You feel much more powerful at the end of the
Yeah.
game,
Yeah.
where at the beginning of the game, you're much more. It feels. I mean, I used the word oppressive earlier, but I remember walking into that city for the first time, and there's that bonfire in the middle of the city, and these people start attacking you, and you don't understand them, and like that whole scene is freaky when you first see the chainsaw characters. That it freaks you out, but then by the end of the game, you're like shooting down a helicopter and running around, going through a mine cart level and stuff like, it changes. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Resident Evil 4 is a fantastic game. I'm just saying it doesn't carry the horror elements throughout the entire game. It's really only the first third of the game or so. Um,
Yeah, I think probably the turning point is once you cross the lake,
oh
which
yeah,
Resident
that.
Evil 4, the lake is probably that is among some of the best sequence
Mhm.
in any like that might be. And we talked about this when we talked about Shadow of the Colossus. Like deep water bothers me,
Yes. Yeah.
and even in like video games, like I'm like there's just and that whole crossing the lake, it was just like oh ugh.
100%. Yeah. Careful. Get yourself line your pants because you're about to get spooked hardcore. That part
But
is freaks you out for sure. So yeah, I think that survival horror has an interesting way of using the gameplay to connect to kind of the horror elements.
but
Oh, what were you gonna say?
well, I was just sort of like part of the problem though is that even with Resident Evil 2 and Dead Space when we were playing those, like the thing is once you understand that resource management is just like some like is the primary sort of like threat. Now Resident Evil 2 thing I think 2 also had a bit of a dynamic system in there where
Yeah,
and so that like
it's
if
true.
you're doing better, it actually sort of like punishes you for playing too well.
Hmm.
And if you're doing really poorly, then the game sort of like eases back sort of eases off the throttle a little bit, which I
Yeah,
think actually is the solution
yeah.
because even talking about Resident Evil 4 and how it does turn very action gamey because like at that point in time like if you like first third or first half of the game and it's like you recognize like hey like if I'm smart about how I utilize my resources like I can actually sort of like build a bit of a bank for
Hmm.
me to sort of like I can bank all this ammo, I can bank all these things, I can bank all these resources so that I can have basically I don't have to worry about running out, which actually removes a layer of threat from the game.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so and Dead
Right.
Space does that too.
Hmm. And they
Yeah.
can't let you know that, because once you know that, then you're going to take advantage of it, right? Then you become powerful again. You can
Mhm.
figure out a way around that. And maybe that's just, again, it comes back to kind of the nature of games in general, because even pulling away from video games, like a game is, these rules that you play by, that you're attempting to master, that you're attempting to create a strategy. And horror is trying to pull your legs out from under you so you don't know what's coming up next. And so if you give too much information, then you can create a strategy and it's not as terrifying, because you recognize your brain. can more easily recognize, oh, there's a bunch of pixels, and I can just, game the system by doing this, this, and this. And then you as a player have power over the game, and it doesn't feel as scary. Like you don't feel like that's taken away from you anymore.
So, I mean, and sort of like we sort of alluded to it earlier, but Amnesia, like part of the gameplay loop is just like get away, get away, get
Mhm.
away, and even the Alien Isolation. And I haven't played Alien Isolation, but
Me
it's
either.
a very similar sort of premise where it's just like, you know, if the alien finds you, you're gonna die, like, and
Right.
that's
Yeah.
and so that there's that constant threat, which that might be a good one to fire up at some point in time. But
Mm.
I digress. But
2021.
it maybe for me, like I think like sometimes, and again, not having played a ton of those games, but when I did play Amnesia, like it was scary. It was like it
Mhm.
was very disturbing, very creepy. But mechanically, I there wasn't enough of a hook. There was no reason for me to keep going. There
Yeah.
was no like whereas within like Resident Evil 2, like you find a gun or you find some ammo or you find like there's always sort of a hook that's sort of like pulling you through the story.
Hmm.
Whereas I looked at sort of and again, sort of specifically Amnesia, and I was like, I don't really want to play this. All it's doing is it's freaking me out. It's
Yeah.
like it's scaring me, and there's no sort of like moment where I sort of feel like that. I think it sort of actually suffered from the opposite problem of like Resident Evil 4, where there was like no reward at all at any point in time. It
Yeah.
was just like we are just going to like scare the crap out of you until like and even sort of talking about that, it's a lot of it is like jump scare stuff,
Hmm.
which I think can be leveraged in a way that is pretty masterful. But after a while, like even that stuff, like the effectiveness of that wears off,
Right.
and it's just like and to be frank, that's sort of like it's like low hanging fruit as far as like actually scary. It's not to say that those things aren't scary and
Hmm.
those things don't startle me, but that it is like, you know, for the most part, it just does feel like very sort of like, well, okay, like you're gonna have something jump out of a corner, like, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, this is going to startle anyone, and so it's actually I would think that the anticipation of something like that happening is actually more scary, using the term correctly, than the actual jump scare itself, because the jump scare is more just startling. The way I see jump scares are the Comic Sans of horror. Like there is a time and a place for them where they can be used effectively. I'm not saying don't ever use them. I know some people do say don't ever use Comic Sans. I'm not one of them. I think there's time and place. Um, a little side note: we were at a baby shower this weekend, and the kids in one room were watching like basically just like nursery rhymes. And the words at the bottom of the screen where they lit up when they were singing was in Comic Sans. And I turned to Samantha and I said, "This is a perfectly acceptable use of Comic Sans." And almost everyone in the room laughed. I wasn't even talking, I was just talking to Sam, but they thought it was hilarious. I'm not making fun of it. I'm saying like there's time and a place to use it. And I think that's
There's a whole
similar.
room of people who were like, we get that reference.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I think in similar fashion, like I don't mind a single jump scare or two in a movie. Like but when that's what your movie is relying on to be scary, I think that just shows the quality of the movie that you're
Yeah.
making. And so to similar effect in video games as well. Like the anticipation, that closed door that creaks open, or is blowing in the wind, or so, that window. Oh man, even walking down the halls of the mansion at the beginning of Resident Evil 2, or at least within the
Yeah.
first couple hours, when the sun's out and not knowing if zombies are going to bust in. Like that anticipation itself is freaky. So whether or not they even bust in, it almost relieves the tension because you think that it's going to happen. Um, Anyways, that's my two cents, my diatribe on jump scares in general. But what were you talking about that I was going to jump in? Oh, so Amnesia. It's funny because we've had very similar experiences with the game. Amnesia. One of the reasons I bring it up is because, I mean, not the least of which is because you brought it up first. But I think for both of us, it basically like if you type into Google like what some of the best horror games are, Amnesia pops up. It's like towards the
It
top of the
shows up
list
on the list. Yeah.
pretty much everywhere. And that's why I think I got it in a Humble Bundle once. I can't remember how I actually got it. But when I sat down to play it a number of years, I mean a long time ago, um, because I do generally like horror. I like getting scared sometimes. And that's a whole other conversation. But generally I think it's sort of like eating spicy food. Like I want to build not I want to build up endurance. I'll put it that way. So
Yeah.
I want to get scared so that I can, not be a wuss, if that makes sense.
So
I
that
want to eat
so
spicy.
that you can consume scarier things
Exactly.
and not be
Exactly.
as scared by them.
And when I'm actually like faced with difficult circumstances in life, like I'm not just gonna totally roll over. Like no, I can, not the video games in real life, whatever. But I think there's an element there. It's somewhat building endurance, and it's just fun sometimes to do it in, like you said in one of your, I think it was bite sized, in a very low stakes environment, playing a video game. So
Yeah.
regardless, Amnesia. So it's one of the highly rated horror games in general, and I had a very similar experience where I I do think the atmosphere was very creepy. The sounds were really creepy. I didn't know what was going on. It seemed like it was getting. I'm trying to think of another word besides creepy, but it was getting scarier as you went on because when you finally were getting some of the story. Anyways, I put a couple hours into it at least, but I just found the puzzle solving to be so boring. Like I didn't want to explore the world necessarily. And then when you did kind of come in contact with the big bad that you couldn't see that was kind of chasing after you, it was freaky. But I remember one scene where it was like in a sewer or something like that, and I'm running away from it, and you can only hear it behind you, which it was genuinely freaky because I'm playing in headphones, as you should with a horror game like that. I think it even tells you to play it in headphones when you first boot up the game. But basically, I messed up. It caught up with me. Oh, my heart stopped. I died. And it reset to the beginning of that part. So you're in the sewer. Okay, so you do it again. Oh, you can hear the footsteps behind you. Oh no, run and hide. Oh, hiding didn't work. It got me. Okay, it wasn't as freaky that time. I went through that same I went through the motions maybe like 5 or 6 times. And 3, 4 times in, I'm just like, this is just frustrating. Like I don't know. I can't get away from this thing. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And it was no longer scary. Um, so again, I think that's kind of that fine line of just like, well, now the immersion is completely broken. I'm no longer scared by this. I'm just annoyed because I can't figure out what to do. And how much of that being able to figure out what to do plays into feeling like you're powerful again is such a difficult tension that you find within most horror games. But for me, playing the little bit of Amnesia that I did, it just was not doing it for me, and so I never went back to it. I'm not against going back to it, but it's going to take a lot
Well,
before
it's
I
just
boot it up
like
again.
it. I don't know. And at this point in time, like you have to just wonder, like, has the game aged
Right.
all that well? Uh, there is a version of it available on PS4. I think that and what's
Interesting.
the sequel? Something of pigs
Yeah, the Home of Pig or something. I don't know. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or whatever that one is.
Machine for Pigs. That's what it is.
Machine for
'Cause it
pigs.
sounds
Yeah.
even creepier. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think I don't. That's some of the, and I guess there's a part of me too that would just sort of say like, I think that, hmm, I guess I'm sort of like hitting the part of my thoughts where like things that we probably ought to be thinking about and a little more aware of
Mm-hmm.
is like we just got done talking about Bloodborne and then the lore of Bloodborne and the there's sort of like a goriness in that
Mm-hmm.
game that I don't know. It's off-putting. It's a little
Yeah.
disturbing. It's kind of like unsettling. But I think too, like the thing is like that's like that disturbing like the disturbing nature of that gore and that just like the horror there actually is in service to the game. Whereas it does feel like sometimes the unsettling nature of these things is actually just it's meant there for sort of titillation or
Yes.
maybe even like anti-titillation or it's meant to sort of
Revulsion.
provoke
Yeah.
yeah but it's sort of like but it's not actually like in service to the game or the world of that game or anything. It's just
Yes.
sort of meant to um a great example is like and I can't think of any games but I think of like the Saw movies.
Yeah.
And it's like I used to just call those torture porn
Mm-hmm.
because the entire premise of the movie was just to be gross. And it's like and it was really interesting practical effects and special effects and everything else, but at the end of the day is like it was just there to gross people out and like and I think in a way that that can be very unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah, it's the movie form of shock rock, right? You
yeah.
know, you say things just to get people to you know revile at what you're doing. Yeah, it's funny. Were you looking at my notes because that was like one of the last little bullet points that I had was the fact that sometimes what is put forth as scary is really just gory and torture, and I think it's exploitative,
Yeah.
is what it is.
That's actually a really good word for it. And I have looked at your notes in the past, but I actually wasn't paying attention to them this time. I'm sorry. Just great
No,
minds and all that.
hey, there you go. I like that one. Is like, but yeah, that's one of the pitfalls. And similar to something, like I don't look very fondly on jump scares. This is like the very lowest rung of that in my mind. It, and I think oh man, you put it so well. Is that it? If it's in service to some of the themes of the game, right? If that revulsion is actually there to show you how terrible something is rather than just to shove it in your face. And you can I feel like I don't want to get too nuanced on this. You can tell when that happens, right? When there's a horror game that's just there, to chop people up and shove it in your face,
Well,
kind of a thing.
I think a great example of sort of like, and it's not necessarily a horror game, although it does have some strong horror ties, but like you look at Mortal Kombat and the fatalities in
Yeah.
there, and it's just like these like and sort of like the when it's showing like the rib cages exploding or whatever and like
Mhm.
people like punching through somebody's chest and like shooting their heart out their back and stuff like the sole purpose there is just like it is the sort of like we're going to turn up the violence, we're going to turn up the gore, we're going to turn up all this sort of like in an attempt to sort of and again it's a type of like titillation, it's a type,
Mhm.
it's meant to sort of uh it's not the same as porn per se, but it is a very like is a very similar idea behind it
Yeah.
that's sort of like
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some games that might be approaching that, or really just kind of having that sort of like slasher movie aesthetic. Did you ever hear of that game Manhunt?
yes,
That one, I feel like from what I've heard, I've never actually played the game. That one got pretty close to that.
that's a
Just
rock
that
steady
same kind
game.
of. Oh, is it? Wow,
Hmm.
is it really? Oh
I'm pretty
man.
sure.
Um, Oh, there was another one.
Outlast?
And I can't remember. Does Outlast do that? I know it does use
Maybe.
some images towards the beginning because I've seen like a playthrough of the beginning that yeah
So
basically
it's a
has.
Rockstar game, not a Rocksteady. Did I say
Okay.
Rocksteady or Rockstar?
Yes. Yeah, you said Rocksteady.
It's a Rockstar game. Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's who I meant, but
Mhm.
we've already talked about how I'm just sort of slipping into senility.
Yeah. Well, oh shoot, there was something but I just forgot what it was. Oh well, I guess I'll just cut that out then. Man. Uh,
Sorry.
anyways, I do think that like you have to be wary of that. Even if we can't give like tons of examples, uh, that I mean, you basically just have to step back. If we're asking how should we then play, like, is there really any redeeming qualities in something like that? You know, is that really what you want to be putting before you? Is that really what you want to be consuming? Because there are some really good horror games. I mean,
Yeah.
we play a spooky game every October, and then we play Bloodborne. Just throughout the year, instead of in October. So we've already played through a handful of really good horror games that we'd recommend or halfway recommend in some cases. But you brought up Dead Space earlier. That is definitely a really good entry, and well, if you don't have any other kind of discussions into what horror games look like, or kind of some of those hallmarks, let's talk about do we have some sort of recommendations for the genre? What do we think are some of the pinnacles of the genre in
Mm.
general?
Well, I mean, we've mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm moving around a little bit. We've mentioned a few of them. Eternal
Yeah.
Darkness.
Hmm.
Unless you have a GameCube, or well, you could, I guess, if you have the disc, you could emulate it or whatever. But
Hmm.
I think that it's in a lot of ways it is sort of like it's probably up there for me.
Yeah.
Dead Space,
Hmm.
Resident Evil 2.
Definitely.
Uh, those are some of the ones I'm like. Resident Evil 4, it's like I said, like you were saying earlier, how just the back half of the game turns very much into like an action game.
Right.
And so that does make it a little difficult to play.
Hmm.
Those are some of the ones that sort of pop out at me. I would
Yeah.
even sort of say like Bloodborne, in as much as
Hmm.
like is sort of a horror game.
Yeah. It's funny because as I looked at some of the lists of like what are most people's favorite, what are the best horror games, it's like I haven't played a lot of these, which is funny because I do enjoy horror in general. But I think part of that has to do with when I find the time to do it, because sometimes I play games casually. I'm doing
Yeah.
other things. I can't focus 100% on the game. And horror doesn't work if you're not focused on it. It's not like it's very different than a JRPG grind.
By running it in the background, you're actually sort of like taking away its power.
Hmm.
Like the horror a horror game actually only is really effective when you are paying attention to it, when you are invested and focused in on it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
pulled up a list here. Some of the stuff that sticks out to me as like stuff that I want to check out at some point in time is Alien Isolation. I've heard
Yep.
really good things about that. Resident Evil 7, uh,
Hmm.
the Until Dawn game is supposed to
Okay.
be pretty scary. I think though that might be one of those ones where it does tend to be sort of like jump scary, and at that point in
Okay.
time might be
Okay.
a bit of a tap out.
Yeah, that one I've had spoiled, so I don't think I'll ever play that one, honestly.
Okay. I'm seeing Soma here.
Hmm.
Um, you know what I thought is sort of, well, I mentioned it before, but Parasite Eve, the Parasite Eve games
Yeah.
sort of feel a bit of a horror vibe. But I would also sort of throw in Limbo and Inside. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and they tend to be like the not nearly as like high stakes
Hmm.
as maybe some other stuff, but they are very good, and they are very creepy, like very
Right.
unsettling.
Yeah, for
So
sure. I've only played Limbo, but I agree. It was definitely very creepy. Yeah, the way that it used its imagery. I mean, the whole thing is silhouetted also, so
I
it
just
doesn't take too much.
I remember towards the very beginning of that game, and I'm moving around a lot, so I apologize. But I remember the very beginning of that game and how there's that scene with like the spider thing, and if you don't do the
Right.
puzzle right, the spider thing's like just spears out and like kills the kid,
Yep.
and it's like, yeah, it's like, and there's not even like gore or anything on the screen, but I remember how like jarring that was.
Yeah. Yeah, how it didn't seem to hold anything back, even though it wasn't gory. Yeah, for sure.
Uh, There's one more that I would recommend, and again, this is a
Hmm.
bit of an older game, and it's kind of hard to play. Well, I think you can play it on PC. I think they got but I'm talking about the Alan Wake games. Um,
Okay. Okay.
like they're top notch, but again, like they are a bit older.
Hmm.
So
Nice. Nice. I have not played either of those. I know I own at least the first one. I might own American Nightmare as well, but I haven't played either of them. So I guess it doesn't really matter. The fact is,
I,
I
th-
do.
I think that at least the first one is definitely worth a playthrough.
Yeah,
It's it's very good, very
I've
good.
heard I've heard good things. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, I think those are some good recommendations. As I'm looking through, like I'm not really finding much else outside of that I would recommend, just because I haven't played him as well. Um, you'd mentioned Outlast earlier. Again, I haven't played it, so I can't recommend it, but I know those are very well-known games. But then if we're talking about well-known games, I mentioned it before the episode. Five Nights at Freddy's are huge,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
not. Those are like jump scare the video game.
Jump scare the
So
video game.
I don't have a very high view of those games. They I know they got popular off of the fact that like streamers play them all the time and they get freaked out by them, and that's fun. I get it. So I'm not one of those people who say that they never should have been made. It's just totally not for me. So and then the other ones that that we talked about Silent Hill 2 earlier. I've played Silent Hill 1 and 2, but those are just hard to recommend because they are older and the gameplay is not great on either of the games. And the first one has a really weird story. I mean, they're both super weird. The first one is not as second one's much better, I will say, in terms
Yeah,
of story department. Um,
yeah. And Silent Hill 2, and again, I really, I would love to see somebody get the license for that and give it just that franchise in general a really solid reboot.
yeah,
Um, because I feel like one of the things is that one of the things that is lacking in the horror genre is really some of the more psychological sort of bends.
hmm,
And I feel like the Silent Hill series really was able to uh, do justice to that sort of genre or that type
yeah,
of horror.
yeah,
Whereas like
definitely.
Resident Evil or Dead Space, like there are some psychologically scary moments or hard
Mhm.
moments, but the entirety of Silent Hill 2 is really the thing that is so incredibly disturbing about that game is the basically the psychology behind it. That
Yeah,
just sort of the way that that game just uh, sort of cracks people open is very um, effective.
right. Yeah, it deals with some really well, there's redundant, some really real things, It is it deals with abuse. Like what horror game can actually actually address that in a way that is meaningful. Like that sounds on paper that doesn't sound like a good idea at all. And the story wise, that game does it very well, I would say, in an interactive medium. Like man, oh man, you have to yeah. So in a sense, like there are some very masterful things in a very not fun to play video game.
Yeah.
But I agree. A really good remake of that, or even just taking those elements, and if you don't want to remake it, then make a new story out of it would be horrifying in all the best ways.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it would require a bit more of a sort of a master's touch. Like you couldn't just hand that project off to anybody.
Right.
But
right.
I would like to see a well done Silent Hill reboot. Reinvent that franchise. But
yeah. The last, okay, well, I want to mention two more. One series is the Fatal Frame series. I've never actually played a game in that series, so I don't know. They are very interesting to me. I want to check them out, so I know that those are big kind of horror series, especially in Japan, but a handful of them still came over to America. So there's interesting, but I don't know what they do. The last game that I wanted to talk about is a very unassuming game. I have not played it, and it's because of what I've heard about the game that I have not played it. I've talked about it on the podcast. I can be a little weeby at times. I did a whole episode on Yu-Gi-Oh before. But this game, it takes it over the edge. It's called Doki Doki Literature Club. And I haven't played it, but it starts off as like basically just like a dating sim. And then from what I've heard, it gradually delves into some really dark stuff and really messes with you as a player, and plays on your emotions, and does some weird things. So I have to at least mention it, but I haven't actually played it.
I remember reading about it when it was like because it sort of like popped up in a lot of circles like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And when did that come out? Because I saw like a little 2017. So a few years ago, it started making making waves in gaming. And I remember doing some reading about it, but it was like it's a PC game, and it's sort of like that visual novel dating sim sort of thing, and then it as it progresses, it gets like more and more off the rails, and it does actually a lot of the breaking the fourth wall stuff, like similar to what Eternal Darkness did.
Yeah.
Because I think there's actually a part where like you have to go into
the game
files and delete stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In order to progress or whatever. And I was like, it's things like that I'm just like, what the like?
Yeah,
that's some like next level master stroke stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And even there, it's like that's tied to PC because of that. But
right, yeah. Well, now that we're talking about it more, maybe I'll look into it a little bit more, because part of the thing is like, you don't want to give away anything when you talk about something like that. And so I don't know that much about it. Okay. How long to beat it? Has it at 4 hours? But it's also, I mean, it's such a lame concept. And I totally get that they turn it on its head. It's just like, do I really want to download a dating sim and play a dating sim for an hour before it starts freaking me out? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
No, that's really scary.
I don't know. Right? Yes. That's the most horrible thing about the game, is the fact that it's a dating sim. So, but the question is, can you date your teacher? Okay. Then that's all probably the most horrifying thing I've said all night.
and that's our cue.
Yes, exactly.
That's what we need to just that. Josh killed it with the terror that is. Just for that alone, Persona 5 ought to make this list.
Right, exactly. That and Mara. But anyways, yeah. it's burned into my, unfortunately.
Uh,
Anyways, so if we didn't mention something that you wanted to talk about when we talk about horror games, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us on Twitter. Our handle is at @bbdowncast. You can email us at the backlog breakdown at gmail.com. We also
the
have
the
the
Bracklog Bakedown.
backlog bake down. Heyo. We're
Heyo.
starting a bake sale. We also have the hashtag Backlog Book Club on Facebook, and we have a Discord server. Let us know if you want in. You can let us know through those ways, or you can reach out personally to us on all kinds of different social medias like PSN, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. GG. I generally go by Broccolope. That's spelled BROCCOLOPE. And Nate goes by.
What's my name again?
What's my name?
Who am I? What am I doing here? No, I go by Nate_McKeever.
There you go. If you like what you've heard on this episode, we would encourage you to share it with your friends. We'd love to have more people in on the conversation. If you want to support us, you can rate us 5 stars on your, podcast aggregator of choice. Reviews are great too. We just love to hear from you. We do also have a Patreon as well. So think of that as a digital tip jar. If you want to drop $1 in there, patreon.com/the backlog breakdown. And finally, you've heard it on the commercial in the middle of the episode, but we are part of the Playwell Network. And so you should check out all the different podcasts that we have on the playwellnetwork.com. We've got a bunch of friends who have some really cool podcasts that are going on as well, and we think you'll like them if you like what we do too.
Yeah,
So
I mean, yeah, and we're actually we're trying to coordinate a bit of a Pwnecast.
heyo,
But
you'll hear more about that and all the horror that is involved in that later.
it'll be Paul making bad jokes. That'll be the scariest. Yeah,
Oh, just
Paul will
Paul?
be
I don't
the
know if it's just
Paul
Paul.
will be the DM. That's going to be the scariest part right there.
Ooh, oh man, dropping hints all over
Yeah,
the place.
yeah.
I know we didn't talk about it, and I don't want to have a whole conversation. Um, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, since we're talking about horror games, that the final kind of version of horror game that we just didn't even talk about were games that use horror themes. So games like Castlevania that uses
Mm,
old horror elements to play into the game, but those aren't scary games. So we kind of kept it. This episode was about horror as a genre, games that
as a
tried to scare you.
storytelling tool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are certain games that use the tropes of different horror media, like books and
Uh,
movies, to do their own thing, but whose gameplay is not scary at all. It's more in grotesque. So I think of even like, well, the first Castlevania was very much a fun game. It was not trying to be scary at all. But even like Ghosts and Goblins did the same thing, where it
yeah.
takes these ideas and it just turns it into a fun arcadey experience. And hopefully this has been a fun arcadey experience for you as well as you've listened to us ramble for the past hour.
Yeah. I hope. I hope. But yeah, that's the thing is good terror, good horror is always punctuated by little bits of hope, little rays of
Mhm.
like the faintest hints of victory.
Hey.
And if you've made it this far, here's a little ray of victory, little beam of hope. Uh, you're almost to the end.
There you go.
So
And
we've
here we are.
we've we've sort of done what we came here to do, Josh. We
Mhm.
dissected horror games. We sort of, you know, I don't know what that
Picking it
was.
apart. Just
Oh,
picking it
picking
apart.
it apart. I like that. Yeah, we picked apart the genre a little bit. We sort of shared some of our personal experiences. Uh, Again, we did the things that we came here to do. What should they do?
Hey, you guys keep beating down your backlogs. We'll keep breaking down the benefits.
That's truth. And the final word goes to none other than uh, at Broccolope in the Discord. I also realized that Dark Souls is the Shin Megami Tensei of action RPGs.
Boom. Dropping that knowledge bomb.
Boom. Boom.